The premature cancellation of Star Wars The Clone Wars left many of the show's planned story arcs incomplete, and while 3 of these arcs were finished and released as part of the show's long-awaited 7th season, there was still a lot of story material that was never finished or properly released. Some of these discarded story arcs were adapted into other forms of media, such as the Son of Dathomir comics and the novel Dark Disciple. Others, such as the planned Yuuzhan Vong arc, were simply discarded. There were also 2 story arcs that were nearly complete, with just the animations left unfinished, which were originally released on StarWars.com as incomplete story reels. One of these, the Bad Batch arc, was finished for Season 7, but the other, the Crystal Crisis arc, wasn't, and has been left in an incomplete story reel state. Now, that's a damn shame, because the Crystal Crisis arc is a contender for the best story arc in the entirety of Star Wars The Clone Wars. In this video, we'll be explaining why. Before we get into things, we'd obviously recommend that you go watch these lost episodes yourselves. That's unfortunately easier said than done. They were taken down from StarWars.com when Season 7 was released, so there's no officially sanctioned way to watch them now, and uploads to YouTube keep getting taken down. As of this writing, the full arc is findable on YouTube, but it's anyone's guess whether that will be the case when you're watching this video. It's bound to be circulating around the internet somewhere, but all the same, we're going to start this video with a more detailed recap than usual in the event that you're unable to watch it. The first episode of the arc, A Death on Utapau, sees Anakin and Obi-Wan dispatched to the neutral planet Utapau to investigate the death of another Jedi, Master Tu-An, who apparently had been assassinated. After investigating the crime scene, Anakin and Obi-Wan determined that Tu-An was killed by a discreet and nearly undetectable precision laser dart, and further investigation suggests that the weapon had been fired by a droid, a Magna Guard to be specific, suggesting the involvement of General Grievous. Other evidence suggests the Separatist assassin was aided by the Armani, a worm-like, low-tech species that had settlements on Utapau, though they were native to Meriden. The Jedi deduce that Tu-An was killed investigating the Armani's dealings with the Separatists, and descend to the Armani settlement at the bottom of Pau City to do some investigation themselves. The Armani chief tells the Jedi that Armani outcasts that live on Utapau's plains had indeed been dealing with the Separatists, and he helps Kenobi and Skywalker track down a pair of Grievous's Magna Guards in the caverns below the city. They manage to overpower the droids, and Skywalker is able to download some vital information from one of their heads, revealing that the droids and their Armani allies had been dealing with the Sugis, a notorious group of arms dealers. In the next episode, In Search of the Crystal, Kenobi and Skywalker track their leads to the Utapauan plains, where they encounter a village of hostile, exiled Armani. They're later captured by the Armani and Sugis, who take their lightsabers and lead them off to the Sugi camp, a set of mounds out in the plains. The 2 Jedi bluff that they're arms dealers looking to make a deal with the Sugis, and they manage to BS their way into a meeting with the Sugi leader, Endente. Endente assumes the 2 have come to purchase the crystal. Hoping to learn more, the Jedi say that they are, only for Endente to inform them that he had already promised it to General Grievous. Endente, on orders from Count Dooku, orders the Jedi to be taken prisoner, but they manage to escape. On their way out, they board a starship that had been disguised as one of the mounds, and inside, they find an enormous Kyber crystal. In the next episode, Crystal Crisis, Kenobi and Skywalker attempt to steal the Sugi ship, but they find the Sugis had sabotaged the vessel's engines, forcing the Jedi to instead load the crystal onto a sled and flee across the plains, pursued by the Sugis. Meanwhile, General Grievous arrives in Pau City, where it's revealed that the city's governor, Toril Blom, is in league with the Separatists and aware of the arms deal. They're joined in the governor's office by Endente, who tries to bluff Grievous that he still has the crystal and that the deal is still on schedule. Grievous, however, knows better, and after beheading Endente for his failure, he sets off to handle things himself. The Jedi manage to evade Grievous and his Magna Guards, but when they reach Pau City, they're cornered by Governor Blom and Grievous's droid armies, who take the crystal and load it onto a shuttle. Blom orders the Jedi killed, but Kenobi and Skywalker are able to cut through the droids and steal a ship, which they use to pursue the shuttle carrying the crystal into space. Grievous, upon his return, kills Governor Blom for his failure and then sets off in pursuit of the Jedi once more. The final episode of the arc, The Big Bang, opens with Grievous chasing Kenobi and Skywalker, who themselves are chasing the shuttle with the crystal aboard, which is inbound to a Separatist fleet. The Jedi are ultimately unable to prevent the shuttle with the crystal from docking aboard a Separatist command ship, and as their shuttle deteriorates from repeated hits, they use its escape pods to board the command ship. Anakin ends up in the wrong hangar, however, while Kenobi is confronted by General Grievous, who defeats the Jedi Master in a brief lightsaber duel and then takes him prisoner. Anakin rescues Obi-Wan, however, and the two Jedi break into the vault where the crystal is being held. They end up using the crystal itself to escape. As they discover, when the droids fire on the crystal, it absorbs the energy from their blasts and amplifies it 1,000-fold, firing off a beam that burns a hole through the reinforced walls of the vault. The Jedi then take the crystal to the hangar, but once it's there, the battle droids in the hangar are able to shoot off some of the crystal's repulsor lift pods, preventing the Jedi from moving it any further. Kenobi decides that the crystal has to be destroyed, and while Skywalker steals a shuttle, he programs all the armored assault tanks stored in the hangar to start firing on the crystal non-stop. His plan works, and the crystal begins to overload, firing out beams of destructive energy in all directions. As the Jedi escape the command ship and Grievous pursues, the crystal explodes, causing an enormous blast that engulfs most of the Separatist fleet above Utapau. The Jedi are able to escape, while Grievous, the lone Separatist survivor, leaves the system as well. Back on Coruscant, Kenobi and Skywalker report to the Jedi Council, which is troubled by their story. Mace Windu wonders aloud what Grievous would want with such a crystal, but Yoda interjects, saying that Grievous wasn't the mastermind of this plot. He recounts that during the old wars with the Sith used weapons of terrible power, and they all had crystals such as this at their heart. Yoda concludes that it was the shadowy Sith Master who was after the crystal, but what sort of superweapon he intended to build with it, Yoda cannot tell. The Crystal Crisis arc is, first and foremost, 4 episodes of fun. Relative to some of the Clone Wars' other great arcs, it's more lighthearted and isn't nearly as heavily concerned with the show's deeper messaging. At the same time though, it manages to keep things serious when it wants to, and it gets dark at a few points. It's a classic Star Wars adventure loaded with cheeky nods to the original trilogy, and it manages to mix a wide array of tones and story tropes surprisingly fluidly, going from a fairly serious murder investigation to an episode of Anakin and Obi-Wan bumbling around to a high-stakes multi-episode chase. The two main antagonists of the arc couldn't be more different. Andente is comic relief and entirely unthreatening, while General Grievous is made absolutely terrifying in this arc. Crystal Crisis is all over the place, but somehow it makes everything work together really well, and to emphasize once more, it's a blast to watch. The plot of the arc is pretty gripping, but it's not the arc's central focus, nor are any of the usual themes of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Crystal Crisis is primarily a character study. The arc is built around exploring Anakin and Obi-Wan as characters and their relationships with each other, giving the audience a deep, detailed look into their dynamic as it was just before the start of Revenge of the Sith. This is how Crystal Crisis makes all those conflicting story elements work together. The arc throws Anakin and Obi-Wan into a wide variety of situations to give us different insights into their characters, and because Anakin and Obi-Wan are still Anakin and Obi-Wan all throughout, it allows the various other components of the episode to mesh together. As Revenge of the Sith and prior episodes of the show prove, it's entirely typical for Anakin and Obi-Wan to go from bantering like siblings to being deadly focused Jedi warriors in the blink of an eye, and it's also typical for them to do both at once. Their relationship was already infused with mixing the serious and unserious, so the rest of the episode gets away with doing the same. Anakin and Obi-Wan are the focal point of the Crystal Crisis arc, so we're going to start by talking about how the arc handles their characters, both individually and as a pair, beginning with a look at Anakin Skywalker. Crystal Crisis depicts Anakin in much the same way as the Clone Wars usually does. He's bold and aggressive, a cunning warrior and an excellent pilot, tough yet clever, headstrong and arrogant, but in a very likable way. He's as fun as he usually is in this show, constantly engaging in banter with Obi-Wan and not taking anything too seriously. We see him in action in a variety of roles. He shows off his piloting skills throughout the 3rd and 4th episodes. We get to see him sneaking around a separatist warship undetected in episode 4, and all throughout, we get to see the sort of aggressive, flashy lightsaber combat he's known for. We even get a sequence of him absolutely going to town on the Sugis with a pair of blaster pistols. But what really stands out about Anakin in this arc is how much darker than usual he is. In Crystal Crisis, as in most episodes of the Clone Wars, we usually see Anakin's character as Obi-Wan would have seen him. He's a hero among Jedi, a noble and deeply caring person, and above all, a good friend. But Crystal Crisis puts Anakin under greater focus than he usually gets, and as a result, we see more of the darkness inside of him than usual. After all, by this point of the show, we're getting ever closer to the events of Revenge of the Sith. Anakin has recently lost Ahsoka and hasn't come to terms with that yet. Thus, even as Anakin's being mostly lighthearted in his adventures with Obi-Wan, he's also got more of an edge to him than normal. And even as we see what Obi-Wan saw in Skywalker, we also see the warning signs he missed. The most obvious of these comes in a death on Utapau when the two Jedi are investigating the death of Master Tu'an. After determining the building the shot that killed her came from, Kenobi and Skywalker question the owner of the place, a Toydarian, whom Anakin quickly loses his cool with. When it becomes apparent that the owner is hiding something and isn't being cooperative, Anakin, fueled by his existing dislike of Toydarians, whips out his lightsaber and threatens to kill the man unless he talks. This isn't the only dark moment Anakin has, either. All throughout In Search of the Crystal, he's perpetually overeager about killing the Sugis, and when one of the Sugi guards is fiddling with his lightsaber, he uses the Force to activate it right as the guard is unwisely pointing it at his eye. This killing accomplishes absolutely nothing, and Anakin essentially just does it for the Siths and giggles. In Crystal Crisis, he chides Obi-Wan for wasting time when his former master gathers the bodies of the fallen Sugis for burial. When Obi-Wan responds that, as Jedi, they should show respect even to their fallen enemies, Anakin scoffs and remarks that the enemy isn't worthy of his respect, dead or alive. None of these are the most serious of infractions, but they all point to Anakin becoming increasingly callous, spiteful, and even cruel. His conduct is unbecoming of a Jedi, and these incidents are all warning signs that there's a darkness growing inside of him. An even worse sign, however, is that all this largely goes unnoticed. Obi-Wan is present for every single one of these incidents, and he just seems to write it off as Anakin being Anakin. When Anakin threatens the Toydarian, he tells Anakin to chill out, but he stops caring once the Toydarian coughs up the information they need. He doesn't say anything to Anakin about how quick he was to threaten someone's life, and he only gives Anakin a light tease after Governor Blom gets pissed at the Jedi for strong-arming his people. When Anakin murders that one Sugi guard, Obi-Wan just sighs and asks if that was really necessary, and he brushes off Anakin's callousness toward the dead Sugis as well. There are two possible takeaways from this. The first is that Obi-Wan is blind to the darkness growing within Anakin, perhaps willfully so. He can't fathom his friend becoming something evil, so he refuses to see the warning signs. The other possible takeaway is that the brutality of the Clone Wars has desensitized the Jedi as a whole to this sort of stuff. For years now, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and all the other Jedi have lived as generals, slaughtering their enemies without pause, and using violence as a means to an end increasingly often. Anakin's warning signs might just be blending in with the darkness that's starting to consume the Jedi Order as a whole. Either way, even as this arc shows us Anakin Skywalker at his most fun, it also shows us the ever-present signs of the dark side lurking within. Then there's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Kenobi is also depicted much the same in Crystal Crisis as he was all throughout the Clone Wars, but as with Anakin, the arc gives him much greater focus than he usually receives. For the most part, he plays the role of the ideal Jedi, as usual. He's typically calm, collected, and cool under pressure, slow to resort to violence, but devastating when there's fighting to be done. He even shows that Jedi morality isn't entirely a thing of the past by insisting on burying the enemy's dead after a skirmish. Kenobi's also as sassy as he usually is in this show, engaging in constant banter with Anakin, General Grievous, and pretty much everyone else around him. But Obi-Wan, like Anakin, is depicted in more depth in Crystal Crisis than throughout most of the Clone Wars. Of course, unlike with Anakin, this added depth isn't a hidden darkness within his character. Obi-Wan is as light can be. But he does feel a bit more layered and human in Crystal Crisis than he usually does. For one thing, Crystal Crisis allows Obi-Wan to show off some skills that he doesn't demonstrate that often in the Clone Wars. During negotiations with the Armani, Obi-Wan is able to understand the Armanan language when Anakin can't, and his aptitude for understanding alien cultures and customs helps negotiations with the Armani go smoothly, despite the Armani in question being aggressive and already on edge. Obi-Wan also does some pretty good detective work in the first 2 episodes, and he demonstrates an aptitude for strategy all throughout. He also gets to use some more familiar abilities of his, particularly the Jedi mind trick, which he casually uses to befriend an enemy Armanan in the 3rd episode. Most importantly though, this arc shows us the skills that earned Obi-Wan his nom de guerre. The Negotiator does plenty of negotiating all throughout the Crystal Crisis, more than he does in any other arc of the Clone Wars, and in the process, he proves to the audience once and for all that he's got one of the highest persuasion stats in the Jedi Order. He successfully negotiates with the chieftain of the Armani, talks the Sugis into revealing crucial information about Grievous's plans, successfully convinces the Sugis that he and Anakin had come for an arms deal, despite the complete nonsensicality of that claim, and even gives Grievous's battle droids a lesson about the Space Geneva Conventions.
Wait. Excuse me, but according to the Yavin Code, all prisoners are required to be blindfolded prior to execution.
Yavin Code?
The Yavin Code, as determined by the Yavin Convention.
He even tries the whole "I will accept your surrender" shtick on General Grievous, though it doesn't work. But what really makes Obi-Wan's character in this arc are the moments that are less typical for his character. The moments that fly in the face of how Obi-Wan usually acts. This is Crystal Crisis' trick for fleshing out Obi-Wan's character. Whereas most of the Clone Wars allows him to maintain his image as the ideal Jedi, perpetually calm and collected, this arc has a few moments where Obi-Wan Kenobi himself loses his patience, much to the enjoyment of Anakin. These moments add a new layer of humanity to Obi-Wan, showing that, in spite of it all, even he has his moments. They're also quite entertaining for the audience, especially the moments that reverse his usual dynamic with Anakin.
This may, in fact, be the slowest creature in the galaxy.
It's doing the best it can, Master.
If and when we get to the port, there's still the question of safe passage. I have a strong sense someone on the inside is working with the Sugi arms dealer.
We'll get off this planet, Master. Please try to relax.
Relax? Well, this is a turn of events. Did you just tell me to relax?
Well, what I meant was...
We're lugging a massive volatile kyber crystal of unimaginable value across the Utapauan plains at a snail's pace, and you, Anakin, are telling me to relax. If we can figure out a way to go faster, the Sugi are surely going to catch us.
Crystal Crisis depicts Obi-Wan not only with more detail than prior episodes, but with details that many viewers might not even expect. It adds the sort of minor contradictions to his character that make us human, and they not only make Kenobi into a more three-dimensional character, but in undermining our expectations of what Obi-Wan is like, it gets us to understand that there's more to the Negotiator and his former Padawan than what's shown on screen, adding a further sense of depth. But the real magic of Crystal Crisis is how it develops Anakin and Obi-Wan in relation to each other. They work together often in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, but usually they're working with others as well, which affects the group dynamic. Usually it's them and Ahsoka, or them and the clones. Crystal Crisis has the two of them working on their own for the entire arc, however, which puts a natural focus on their relationship with each other. From beginning to end, the arc makes clear what close friends the two men were. They fluctuate between acting like brothers to acting like an old married couple over the course of the arc, and it's a joy to watch. The chemistry between them is fantastic, and it's abundantly clear just how much they care about one another. None of it ever feels forced or fake, and there are innumerable little details that make their relationship feel as real as possible, from a brief moment in which the two argue over which controls on a Sugi speeder do what, to another where they debate whether they should first cut the crystal loose from the rafters and then force grab it, or attempt both at the same time. Many of these sequences are played for laughs, but others are just little beats that serve no purpose other than to make the characters feel real and establish the dynamic between them. What Crystal Crisis might be best at, however, is showing just how well Anakin and Obi-Wan work together. There's a constant, wordless coordination between the two. They clearly trust each other completely, and they know each other well enough to be able to easily anticipate the other's actions. When they debate a course of action, it's usually just banter. When push comes to shove, they both know what to do and play their part flawlessly each time. When Obi-Wan is captured by General Grievous, he's not really all that worried. He knows that he just has to stall the droids long enough for Anakin to arrive, and when the two Jedi are trying to talk to the Sugis into showing them the crystal, they work off each other pretty smoothly, improvising well enough that the arms dealers buy their story. The trust between the two men is also particularly evident. At the very end of the final episode, when the repulsor lift pods on the crystal are shot out and Obi-Wan determines that the crystal needs to be destroyed by overloading it, Anakin doesn't question this or even ask what he's planning. Trusting that Obi-Wan's plan will work, he just leaves to steal an escape craft while Obi-Wan sets off to carry out his plan. The final episode also reveals that the two have developed a Bad Batch style list of pre-made plans with coded names. When Anakin suggests a number 5 special to board the Separatist cruiser, Obi-Wan immediately understands this to mean the old escape pod trick. Of course, we can't talk about Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship in this arc without talking about all the banter. If you told us that the writing team behind the Clone Wars came up with this arc solely as an excuse to write 4 episodes of Anakin and Obi-Wan banter, we would believe it, because the whole arc is chock full of it. It isn't anything all that new. Anakin and Obi-Wan going at it is always fun, and it's something that pervades the Clone Wars and the first part of Revenge of the Sith. But in Crystal Crisis, it really shines. These episodes have some of the best dialogue writing in any Star Wars TV series, and it's better than the dialogue in all of the movies as well. It's almost un-Star Wars-like to rely on amazing dialogue as much as these episodes do, honestly. That's about all there really is to analyze about the dialogue in this arc, but if you thought we'd give up the opportunity to share our favorite bits of banter, you're sorely mistaken. We'll start with a clip that comes after Anakin and Obi-Wan accidentally seal themselves inside the secure vault Grievous has the crystal in, where their argument about what to do next is interrupted by droids with some serious comedic timing.
This door is too thick!
Patience, Anakin.
Patience? We're stuck in an airtight, highly secure vault on Grievous's own ship, and we're outnumbered 500 to 1.
It doesn't help when you sum up our situation to hammer home a point.
You do that too sometimes.
No, you choose to complain, while I choose to come up with a plan.
All right, what's your plan this time, Master?
I plan to wait for the droids to open the door for us.
Oh, you can't be serious.
On top of great Obi-Wan and Anakin moments, this arc is also packed full of clever little references to the original trilogy. Some are subtle, like the shot of Grievous being jostled around in his cockpit after the crystal explodes, being identical to a similar shot of Vader from A New Hope, while one of our favorites is incorporated into one of the arc's best bits of banter.
Are we there yet?
You're not getting tired, are you?
Tired of walking? No. Tired of being a prisoner? Yes. Oh, look! Another mound. The thrills never stop on Utapau.
Very good, Anakin.
No, I mean it. Look at all this grass. Have you ever been so excited?
Anakin, that's quite enough.
You're right. I prefer the mound to the grass. They just really stand out.
Wait. That's no mound. That's a spaceship.
But the best of the best has to be a brief clip from the start of The Big Bang, in which Yoda, via hologram, chides Obi-Wan for being too cavalier after he delivers a status report to the Jedi Council. Obi-Wan, naturally, is beside himself from the sheer unfairness of being called too cavalier while sitting right next to Anakin freaking Skywalker.
Cavalier? You're cavalier all the time and no one says anything about it.
I'm just better at it, that's all.
Of course, Anakin and Obi-Wan get serious sometimes too, and perhaps the most heartfelt character moment in this arc comes in Search of the Crystal, in which Anakin reflexively suggests contacting Ahsoka to swing by with the ship before catching himself. The moment bothers him. He's clearly not over Ahsoka's departure from the Order, and Obi-Wan asks if he wants to talk about it. Anakin deflects, but after they set up camp for the night, Anakin ends up talking about it anyway. This moment is especially important because none of the completed episodes of Star Wars The Clone Wars have a moment like this. In the completed series, we never get to see how Anakin really feels about one of his character's most important emotional beats. This arc was supposed to fill that role, which makes it all the more criminal that it wasn't finished for Season 7, especially given how heart-wrenching a scene it really is.
Anakin, dwelling on Ahsoka's decision won't bring her back.
I miss her, okay? Is that what you wanted me to say? I still can't understand how she could have left the Order.
It was a surprise decision to all of us.
It was wrong. She's a Jedi. She belongs with us. She's one of us.
She made the decision, Anakin.
Well, what choice did we give her? The moment there were any suspicions about her loyalty, the Council turned their back on her.
I will grant you mistakes were made, but she chose to leave. Part of the Jedi way is not letting emotion cloud your better judgment, and that's precisely what Ahsoka did, even in her most critical moment.
Anakin's pain here speaks for itself. In spite of Obi-Wan's advice, he clearly does blame himself for Ahsoka's departure. He also has plenty of blame for the Jedi Council, as Ahsoka did, but even when he's talking about what the Council did wrong, he says that we left her no choice, including himself. Even when he logically knows that others had a share of the blame, he blames himself first and foremost, even when talking about aspects of the situation that he had no hand in. In the context of Anakin's broader character flaws, the reason for this becomes clear. If you think back to our character analysis of Anakin, we discussed how Anakin's great fear was losing the people he cared about, and this desire for greater power came from his desire to use that power to save those people, to prevent himself from losing them. In the Clone Wars, Anakin loses yet another person, this time Ahsoka, and in this clip he blames himself not for what he did to drive Ahsoka away, but because of what he couldn't do. He wasn't powerful enough to prevent the circumstances that drove Ahsoka away from the Order, and that's what he's really blaming himself for here. Even as he grieves over the loss of Ahsoka, he can't help but think that if he had been stronger, if he had been more powerful, he could have prevented the whole thing to begin with. It eats away at Anakin, making him more determined to never again lose someone he cares about that deeply. In other words, it drives him down the path of the dark side. Obi-Wan, of course, does his best to help his friend with grief, in the process providing a much-needed counter-argument to the usual narrative of Ahsoka's departure. He points out, correctly, that Ahsoka had let emotion cloud her better judgment, and that, more than anything else, that was the cause of her decision to leave the Order. As we've discussed in the past, Ahsoka had been framed extremely well, and it would have been both irrational and irresponsible for the Council to give her lenience just because they thought they knew and trusted her. They thought the same of Count Dooku, Sora Bulk, and Depa Billaba after all fallen Jedi, and there was nothing that suggested Ahsoka was any different. The Jedi Order didn't betray Ahsoka, Barriss Offee did, but because the Council wasn't willing to take her on faith against overwhelming evidence, they got the blame, both from Ahsoka and from many in the audience. It's an understandable impulse, and we sympathize with Ahsoka. How can you not? But it's still a clouded view of the situation. Narrative-wise, this quick line from Obi-Wan presents this argument to the audience as well as to Anakin, which is also something missing from the aired episodes of this series. Obi-Wan intends to help Anakin with his grief, but of course, it doesn't. Obi-Wan doesn't understand the true nature of what Anakin's blaming himself for, so his response falls on deaf ears. It's a nice effort, but at the end of the day, Anakin doesn't make any progress on dealing with his feelings over Ahsoka's departure in this scene. He just leaves them to fester, to feed the dragons of fear in his heart. We all know where that leads him.
How would you feel if I turned into a major disappointment?
It's not the same.
It's precisely the same. You took me under your wing and practically raised me. I'm your Padawan, just like Ahsoka was mine. How well would you sleep knowing I failed you?
Not very well, I imagine. Luckily, that isn't true, and never will be.
Anakin and Obi-Wan aren't the only characters the Crystal Crisis arc does extremely well though. This arc also includes by far the best depiction of General Grievous in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and the best depiction of Grievous in canon as a whole. In sharp contrast to the lackluster way in which the show usually uses his character, Grievous is terrifying in the Crystal Crisis arc. Not only that, but he's also extremely competent, as ruthless as ever, and he always feels like a genuine threat. Had this arc been completed, he also would have looked better. That new model General Grievous sported in his sole brief Season 7 appearance was originally meant to make its first appearance in this arc. Grievous only appears in the last 2 episodes of the arc, taking over the role of main antagonist from the goofy and entirely unthreatening Andente. In the roughly 15 total minutes of screen time he gets, however, he really shines as a character. Instead of sending his underlings to do everything, he often sets out to handle matters himself. He chases Kenobi and Skywalker to the starport in Crystal Crisis, and in the Big Bang, he repeatedly takes to the cockpit of his starfighter to chase the Jedi down some more, when previously, the show had mostly shown Grievous using his fighter to flee battles that weren't going his way. The arc shows him to be a good pilot too, able to keep pace with Anakin Skywalker and score enough hits on the Jedi shuttle to cripple it. Each time Grievous chases the Jedi, he's shown to not only be utterly relentless, but also perfectly capable of putting an end to the galaxy's 2 most famous Jedi. He proves as much by absolutely trouncing Obi-Wan Kenobi in a brief lightsaber duel. This is actually his only duel with either of our Jedi heroes, however. He only clashes with Obi-Wan once, and the arc goes out of its way to prevent Anakin and Grievous from meeting prior to Revenge of the Sith, often having them just barely avoid bumping into each other. But Grievous isn't just a threat because he could kill Anakin or Obi-Wan directly. He's a threat because, in this arc, he's smart and competent. To give credit where it's due, the Clone Wars has occasionally let Grievous's intelligence shine through, as in the episode Grievous Intrigue. But in the Crystal Crisis arc, Grievous really proves why he's the one in command of the droid army. In the episode Crystal Crisis, even as he sets off in pursuit of Skywalker and Kenobi, he foresees that he might not be able to catch them and has his army head to the starport under the command of Governor Blom, allowing them to be there waiting when the Jedi show up. In the Big Bang, Grievous is also able to correctly predict the Jedi's movements after Obi-Wan escapes, though he's ultimately unable to stop them from destroying the crystal. Not only does Crystal Crisis make clear that Grievous stands a chance of killing our heroes, but it also shows that he's capable of outsmarting them too. Above all though, the version of General Grievous we see in this arc is absolutely ruthless, which, combined with his competence and effectiveness, is what makes him so terrifying.
Is being delivered as we speak. It should be here momentarily.
Oh, really? And how will your soldiers get it here?
Now, we have secured the necessary transport.
They won't have a problem getting it back from the Jedi. Do you think I'm an idiot? My guards just reported back to me that the crystal is in possession of Skywalker and Kenobi.
No, wait! That's not possible!
If you don't have the crystal, then there's no reason to deal with you. Deal on!
Grievous killing his subordinates for their failure isn't anything new, but how often he does it in this arc is, and the manner in which he does so is usually different. He's colder about it. No less angry, but much more clinical and cruel. In a general sense, Grievous is far more Vader-like in Crystal Crisis than he usually is, and it suits him well. This version of General Grievous isn't comic relief. Nothing he does is ever played for laughs. When he's on screen, things get deadly serious, and in this story arc, his subordinates and enemies alike fear him, and rightly so.
I'm sorry, my lord.
No. Now you are sorry.
This is a version of General Grievous worthy of his best expanded universe appearances, Labyrinth of Evil and the Revenge of the Sith novelization. It's a version of Grievous we would have loved to see earlier in the Clone Wars, and it's absolutely criminal that one of the best depictions of one of Star Wars' coolest characters was left unfinished. So that does it for our discussion of the arc's characters. But character isn't the only thing the Crystal Crisis arc does well. Before we wrap the video up, we're going to spend some time on one last aspect of this arc that works particularly well, its world building. As we mentioned in our summary, most of Crystal Crisis takes place on Utapau, a planet that was seen in a decent amount of detail in Revenge of the Sith. The Crystal Crisis arc gives us a more detailed look at the planet, however, showing us more parts of the planet we'd already seen while also showing us new aspects of Utapau not seen in the film. The arc takes us back to Pau City, the sinkhole metropolis seen in Revenge of the Sith, where we see more of the Pau'ans, one of Utapau's 2 sentient species. The other species, the Ute, are mentioned in the opening sequence of a death on Utapau, but don't have any significant appearances. But this arc also makes clear that Utapau is, as Inspector June says, a melting pot, home to a variety of non-native sentient species. Some of these have integrated into the society of the Pau'ans and the Ute. Others, most notably the Amani tribes, live on their own in the caverns at the bottom of the sinkhole cities, which they share with the fearsome Nos monsters, which were designed for Revenge of the Sith, but ultimately cut. We also get to spend time on the surface of Utapau, which was only briefly glimpsed in Revenge of the Sith. Supplementary materials establish that the surface of Utapau is dangerous, being windswept and prone to storms. Consequently, it's unsuitable for permanent settlements. Crystal Crisis holds to this lore, depicting the surface of Utapau as a mostly barren grassland dotted with a few mounds here and there, with the only artificial structures being a nomadic Amani camp and the starship base used by the Sugis. The Amani and the Sugis are both used pretty well throughout this arc. The Sugis, the galaxy's premier arms dealer, are a new species introduced for the arc, and they're pretty cool. At first, they seem to be towering insectoid creatures, tough but not very intelligent, but when we meet Andente, it's revealed that they're not only much more intelligent than the audience or Jedi give them credit for, but also that they're actually diminutive humanoids, and the insectoid lower bodies sported by most Sugis are just exosuits. The Sugis are unique, and quickly established to be as complex a species as any, not just another variety of alien thug. The Amani, meanwhile, were first seen in Return of the Jedi and fleshed out in the expanded universe, and again, this arc is very faithful to how the Amani are characterized in the expanded universe, although it gets the pluralization of the name wrong. In the expanded universe, the Amani were native to Maridon. In fact, they were originally supposed to appear on Maridon in the Clone Wars' first season, but it's not unrealistic that a few tribes could be transplanted to a place like Utapau, which suited them well enough. As in the expanded universe, the Amani are a low-tech people, relying mostly on simple weapons and their own natural strength, which is formidable. They even curl themselves up and roll around like droidekas for speed, which is another detail that comes from the expanded universe. But much as in the EU, the Amani are also much more intelligent than they're usually given credit for, and this arc shows that they can easily figure out and use more advanced alien weaponry. As with the Sugis, the Amani are depicted to be a complex species, more than just another kind of alien thug. None of these additions are all that radical, quite the contrary. They all fit very nicely with Utapau's depiction in Revenge of the Sith and in EU sources. But they do a lot to add a sense of life to Utapau. Even with the animation work for the arc incomplete, Pau City feels like a lively and diverse place, even though it's mostly empty in the story reels. And from beginning to end, the arc gives the impression that the writers paid close attention to the setting, much like with everything else in this arc. Well, that's our look at what might be Star Wars The Clone Wars' best story arc, even unfinished. We'd love to see these 4 episodes completed one of these days, but we're not holding our breath, and even incomplete, this arc is a joy to watch. We hope you've enjoyed our analysis, and as always, we'd love to know what you think. What was your favorite part of the Crystal Crisis arc? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.